Good morning, 4 minutes after 8, Tuesday, the 10th of November. Coming up later in this hour, Prince Charles urges people to buy British food, but how good is it? SeaWorld to phase out killer whale display in San Diego. Boris Johnson joins me live from Israel to talk about the importance of trading, particularly for London, with that country.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
A story that was very big on the news agenda yesterday and will continue to be big through today and tomorrow, and actually probably all the way through until we get a referendum. David Cameron today will place a 4-year ban on EU migrants claiming benefits at the forefront of his renegotiation of Britain's membership of the EU. Mr Cameron will back up his demand with the claim that nearly half of all new arrivals from the EU are claiming benefits. He will say that 43% of EU migrants rely on the support of the UK benefits system during their first 4 years in the country. This represents 224,000 EU nationals out of 526,000 new arrivals. Now, I'm sorry to blitz you with figures. Stay with me for just a few, at this time in the morning, stay with me for just a few more. About 148,000 of these claimants, that's around 66%, receive tax credits, housing benefits and other welfare handouts available to people in work. Downing Street said that EU migrants entitled to so-called in-work benefits claim an average of £5,000 per family, costing UK taxpayers £530 million in 2013. That's the last figure for which years are available. Now, under the government's planned reforms, none of these claims would be permitted for migrants in their first 4 years. If you return to what the Prime Minister said at that CBI meeting yesterday, and he talked about the importance of allowing business to flourish, he talked about various other key matters, he didn't really address what many commentators would say is the elephant in the room, which is this idea of limiting migration, of somehow restricting it, which of course is an absolute anathema to the whole principle of the European Union. But will this be enough? Richard Tice is co-founder of Leave.eu. He's a businessman himself, property entrepreneur and former CEO of a FTSE 250 company, and joins me now. And that's the question to you, Mr. Tice. Will this be enough, do you think, to assuage these concerns? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. No, I don't think it will at all. I think the Prime Minister likes to talk tough, but the reality is his actions just don't match his words. And, this list of demands that he's talking about no more than restates actually what's the existing status quo. He really has achieved so little since his Bloomberg speech. And I think as more people get engaged with this subject, they'll realise that actually the biggest risk here is Britain staying in, with the risk of ever higher contributions to the EU, ever more rules and regulations, ever more centralisation. And people will appreciate that actually Britain can do so much better.
Is there any package of measures, any reasonable package of measures the Prime Minister and his colleague George Osborne could get from Brussels, from Europe, that would make you happy?
I think most people who are Eurosceptic, what they want is to be able to be a sovereign nation, so we have control over our own rules and regulations, control over our own borders, and the ability to conduct our own free trade agreements, for example, with Commonwealth countries like India, where the European Union's been trying for 7 or 8 years. So, of course there are things that, would make us a sovereign nation again, but at the moment this package is frankly astonishingly weak.
Stay on the line if you would. I want to bring someone else into the conversation at 8 minutes after 8. Will Straw is the Executive Director of Britain Stronger in Europe, and we're hearing from my other contributor, Mr. Straw, that we need, or the people desire, control over their trade, control over their borders. Sounds about right, doesn't it?
Well, I think we actually get a very good deal from the European Union at the moment. And the question I'd put back to Richard Tice is, if you want to bring back all the budget contributions we make to the EU, if you also want to end free movement entirely, how on earth do you think we'll get access to the single market, the free trade area with the European Union of 500 million citizens, which countries only get access to if they're willing to make a budget contribution and accept the rules and regulations, which is exactly what Norway and Switzerland does. But talk about sovereignty, as Richard does. What Norway has to do to access the single market is accept all the European Union's rules and regulations without any say in how they are set. So I think that actually Britain is stronger, we're safer, we're better off as part of the European Union. Of course, these reforms that the Prime Minister is trying to achieve will improve that relationship. But actually, if we tried to get access to the single market without being part of the European Union, we would actually lose sovereignty rather than gaining it.
Richard Tice.
Well, the reality is everybody, Australia, China, all countries around the world can trade with Europe. This idea that you have to be a member of the EU to be able to trade with it is a complete myth. We would operate under normal World Trade Organization rules, but the reality is because the EU sells over 100 billion a year now, according to the latest figures for 2014, to the UK than we do to them, the reality is we'll negotiate our own special agreement. We're the fifth largest economy in the world. We're the EU's biggest export partner. It's a complete myth to say that you have to be in the EU to trade with it. You know, we welcome our European partners as friends, but we don't want to be a member of this bureaucratic, cumbersome club that is completely unable to move flexibly. For example, look what's happening in the steel industry at the moment.
Will Straw?
There are two problems with what Richard says. The first is that the United States, which is our biggest export market, has said very clearly they would not do a free trade deal with us if we left the European Union. China's made similar noises, and it'd be interesting to hear what the Indian Prime Minister Modi says when he's in the UK next week. Let's see what he says about that. Secondly, it's simply not the case that, as Richard Tice is saying, that there is this big imbalance. We export about 45% of our exports to Europe. By contrast, it's a fraction, tiny fraction, about 6% of exports from the European Union come to the UK. So we wouldn't actually get a particularly preferential deal. And why should they? If we were to leave and then suddenly want to get access to the single market without any of the tariffs, with that free access, and we got that deal, what would stop Italy or Spain or Greece or Poland saying, hang about, we want that deal as well? It's just not going to happen. And I think it's time for Leave campaigners to be a bit more honest about what they want to see from Britain if we left the EU.
I think my listeners, Mr. Tice, just interrupting if I may, my listeners would be very concerned if Mr. Straw is right when he says that America would not...
He's not right at all.
To say wouldn't...
Right at all.
Well, I am. The US
we don't have a free trade agreement with America at the moment. You know, the reality is, you know, America has negotiated trade agreements with lots of small companies on a one-by-one basis. It's a complete myth.
Is it true, Mr. Tice, that last week the US trade representative said that the US would not do a trade deal with the UK?
The EU, if you're not a member, it's
Mr. Tice, I don't know, your line seems to have dropped out. Richard Tice, can you hear me?
The average tariff...
Mr. Tice, we've seen you're echoing. I think your phone's fallen off or something. Can you hear me?
You're the one that needs to be honest with the British people.
No, we'll go back to Will Straw. Let's just come back while we try and get the line back with Richard Tice. Will Straw, coming back to what the Prime Minister is going to say today, is this weakening his position? How do you imagine European leaders might respond?
Well, I think it is an ambitious reform agenda, but I think it will improve the relationship that we have with the European Union. I mean, as I say, I think that it's not perfect, the European Union, in a sense. How could any organisation of its size be that way? But we do get a benefit in terms of jobs around the country from the trade that we have with the EU, lower prices because we don't pay tariffs, unlike other countries, for European goods. So I think this reform agenda will improve that, but we get a good deal at the moment.
But isn't the reality that when the European Union was put together, it was at a time when trading, and back in the 50s and 60s, it was a time when trading did have borders. Now, the fact that you or your children can get on the internet and they can buy goods from all around the world, that's completely revolutionised how nations trade. We don't need these giant, almost behemoth trading blocks, do we?
Well, what we do need is to keep the tariffs down. And in fact, in the European Union, there are no tariffs. That's the basis of the single market. And I would.
But you can and I can. I can get anything I want from around the world now and have it delivered by Amazon. I don't need to be. Sorry, go on.
You pay a tariff if you buy it from another country.
Yes.
And that is the reality for many countries around the world. And you know, that's been the importance of trade deals.
Yes.
But the single market, of course, means there are no tariffs.
Yes, I'm going to stay on the line, but I particularly want. I think we've got Mr. Tice back. Mr. Tice, I have to say that's all right. But my listeners, if this is right, that Mr. Straw is saying that there's no trade deal with the US, that's going to frighten my listeners, Mr. Tice.
It's simply not the case. The US has got a trade deal with Oman, for heaven's sake. You know, we don't have a trade deal with the US at the moment. You don't need a trade deal to be able to trade with people. We just operate under normal World Trade Organization rules. And if we leave the EU, we'll have a seat, we'll have influence at the WTO, which sits above the European Union. You don't need to be a member of a protectionist trade bloc in order to trade globally. And, you know, Britain can do so much better if we can negotiate our own free trade agreements all around the world.
Final sentence for each of you, if we can. How much, I'll start with you, Will Straw, how much do you think that border control, immigration, Europeans arriving in this country, how much is that likely to dominate this conversation? And if so, isn't that a very difficult one for the Prime Minister to counter?
It's clearly a very big issue for people. I stood in the general election and had many, many conversations with people about immigration, so I know what a big concern it is for people. But if we want access to the single market, to keep down the low tariffs, to keep down prices, then we will need to accept the rules and regulations. Switzerland, which is not part of the European Union but has access to free trading goods, still accepts free movement from the European Union. That's part of the deal. Now, I think there are some changes that we can make. There's been cross-party agreement that we need to restrict the benefits that new arrivals from different European countries can receive. That seems very sensible to me. Actually, people are also concerned about the illegal immigration of people coming from North Africa through Europe to countries in the European Union. Of course, if we left the European Union, we'd lose that cooperation. So rather than the French authorities putting people through their paces at Calais, the border would effectively move to Dover. That seems to me like a step backwards. So,
all right, Mr. I must end it there. Same question to you, Richard Tice.
I think the British people, as they engage with this issue, will realise and are realising that the biggest risk is staying in. The definition of a sovereign nation is being able to control your own laws and your own borders. And that's what the British people want.
But how much will migration drive the vote in a sentence, Mr.
It will drive it significantly because it's a key concern, and the Prime Minister's demands don't deal with that at all.
I'm grateful. Will Straw, thank you, Executive Director of Britain Stronger in Europe, and the first contributor was Richard Tice, co-founder of Leave.eu, former CEO of a FTSE 250 company. All right, over to you. After the news, Prince Charles is urging us all to buy British food, but hang on a second. Just how good is it? We'll look at that in more detail. It's 8:16. LBC News headlines then. Lisa Aziz.
Boris Johnson's denied claims the London 2012 Olympics were